Hi, my name's Hamish Friedlander. I work for Silverstripe, and I love money. I also love programming. I've been doing it since I was 6, and pretty much every day since then. Every day that I do program is a much better day than any day that I don't get to program. There's nothing else that I can think of that I get to do that's quite so satisfying. As programmers, we form worlds from nothing, dragging them from the ether of our thought. It is pure, limitless creation. It is bliss. It is nirvana. But it's not money, and I love money more. I love eating. I love sleeping in a bed. I love not fearing for tomorrow. I would murder every one of you if I did not get caffeine every 6 hours, so the ability to buy flat whites is quite important. So, as amazing as money is, as programming is, if I had to choose between programming and money, I'd choose money. Fortunately, I'm incredibly privileged, and I hope everyone here feels this way, to have a job where we get to do what we love and still get paid. Programming has turned out to be not just a hobby that I have to do at home while going and doing something else. People, it turns out, will pay me to do programming, and that's great, so I don't have to choose. I also love open source. I think the desire to share is innate to all people. I personally would not be a developer if when I was learning as a kid, people had not made compilers and code examples and all those things free. I think free access to information is crucial to expanding our economy, societal progress, and technological progress, and to ensure nothing less than humanity's survival. I don't think it's egotistical to say that, at least in part, I am responsible for the continued existence of mankind because I open source my code. But still, I really love money. And I just don't have to choose, like I don't have to choose between programming and money, I actually don't have to choose between open source and money, too. The company I work for, Silverstripe, open sources a lot of our code. Not only do we make money, I think we make more money because we open source our code than if we didn't. So this isn't just how to give away all your stuff, or how to give away all your stuff and maybe make a little bit of money so that you can afford to eat. This is how to give away all your stuff and make enough money to retire and go and live in a giant diamond house on the back of a cyborg golden tiger. But before I can retire to a life of luxury aboard my obscene and frankly rather disturbing cyborg bling cat mobile home, I need money, other people's money. How am I going to get them to give me that money? Whether I'm selling a product or a service or indirectly funding through advertising, I need to turn those people into customers, because it turns out you can't just tell people they have to give you their money. You sort of get thrown in jail if you do that. So obviously, whatever I'm selling needs to solve a problem that these potential customers have got, but it's rare to be the only competitor in a market, at least until you've become such a success, you've crushed the life out of all your competitors and can live the life of a sweet, sweet monopolist. But I want any potential customers to choose me and not those other chumps. So given a bunch of products they might buy, how does a potential customer choose? So the first thing that you might think is that they choose based on price. They will look at all of the options they're considering and how much money they've got in their wallet and how much money they can convince the bank to give them, how much money they can borrow from their parents, and say, this is the thing I want, this is how much money I've got, that one's the best price, I'll buy that one. They might also decide based on features. Everybody loves new shiny stuff. What features does this product have? What features does the other product have? Let's get a big list of them and choose which one's got the features that are most attractive to me. Or they might choose on support. They might realize that they're going to need someone to help fix their problems in 6 months or 5 minutes. And they're going to want to have someone to call up and say, this thing is broken, and they're going to pick the person who's going to offer them the best support. So that's the way people buy things, right? They look at all those criteria, they do them all on a big list, they probably work out some sort of spreadsheet with some graphs and some data, because they're all sensible, rational people. And then they say, that one is the absolute best based on all my criteria, it meets my cost and feature and all those other requirements, it's the best on those criteria, I'm going to buy that one. No, that's not how people buy stuff at all. Occasionally, if they're spending a lot of money, they might put a lot of effort into it. But actually, picking on criteria is really, really hard. For instance, costs are much harder to compare than you might expect. When you're even just looking at the price tag, is that price tag just a once-off payment? Are you buying something straight off the shelf, or is there going to be some bespoke customization? If there is bespoke customization, is it a quote for that customization, or is it an estimate? Hopefully you're working with an agile shop. If you're not working with an agile shop, good luck to you. But if you are working with an agile shop, they probably aren't going to give you a quote because they're going to want to commit to a certain number of features. And if they haven't committed to a certain number of features, they might be able to give you a quote for a certain number of weeks, but then maybe you're not going to get what you want. And there's going to be ongoing enhancements potentially. What you buy is not necessarily going to be what you want in 6 months or a year. Internally, you're going to need some knowledge transfer, some training, how to use this thing. You might be able to rely on all your staff to be amazing. You might just assume all your staff are amazing, and turns out in 2 weeks they can't use this incredibly complex piece of whatever you've bought them. So you're going to need to know how much to pay for training. And all of this sort of stuff gets run down into this term called total cost of ownership, which is how much you're going to have to pay over the lifetime from the instant you bought the product, all the time it's solving your problems until the time it's done. And total cost of ownership is incredibly hard to work out. You can't just look at a price tag. There's not just a number that you can go and find and say, that's the price. You really can't know for a set of products which one's going to be the most expensive, which one's going to have the total cost of ownership. Because you're trying to predict the future when you're working out total cost of ownership. And you're predicting it off very limited information. So what about features then? You can't rely on cost. How about features? The problem is that features are fungible. When people are buying things, although they might be looking at a list of features, they don't actually choose on features. What they want is someone to solve their problems. They've got something that they are trying to do, and they want to buy something that lets them do that. There's lots of different ways that they can solve that problem. And there's even more people who will tell them that their product will solve their problem, even though it might not. Sometimes that's a legitimate confusion. If somebody's explaining to you what their problem is in 5 minutes, you're not going to really get a good context. Sometimes it's someone deliberately trying to get a sale. I love money, but I don't really like lying to people, and not everybody has the same compunction. Everyone in this room, I'm sure, is perfectly honest, wouldn't do that, but you are competing against people who would. Even if there is a feature, the marginal cost of code is approaching zero. You only have to look at the number of things that are in the iPhone store for free, or basically for free, or free, except they try and trick you to give them a bunch of money, to know that it's pretty easy to whip up a copy of something that's really popular. So if your software doesn't have a feature and someone else does, and it turns out that's an important sales benefit, you can add that fairly quickly. But likewise, if you've got a great feature that you're relying on, I would be working on more features because other people are going to be working on those, replicating those features too. And if they can get enough sales, it's not going to have that much of a difference as far as the cost goes. And finally, generally when people are buying stuff, there's just too many cooks. They've got their problems, other people in the company have got their problems. They're trying to pick a product that's not just solving their problems, but the problems of 20, 50, 100, 200, 1,000 users. And they don't know what all those problems are, and they don't really care as much as they care about their problems, because their problems are theirs and therefore much more important than everybody else's. But nevertheless, there's all these problems. And so if you've got a set of features and they fix some problems well and other problems not so well, it's really, really hard to decide based on a list of features which of those products is going to solve your problems best. Well, so then features are garbage and cost is garbage. We can't decide on those. What about support? At least support you can, have some SLAs, you can have some contracts, you can have some specific things that say, this is the sort of support you're getting, we guarantee it. If we don't, then you can sue us, or we'll do this, we'll give you your money back, or whatever. The problem is that contracts and SLAs are failure management, not control. They're there to dictate what happens when you fail to provide support, not to say this is how much support within quite a wide band is acceptable. If you go to a company and they're continually just skirting the edge of their SLA commitment, if there's 99.7% guarantee of uptime and they have had 40 2-second outages in the last hour, and all of those 2-second outages are underneath their monitoring requirements and none of them count as far as SLAs go, well, they're still meeting their contract, but that's not really what they'd call good support. And if you call them up and say, I've got this problem, and they say, we don't care, we're meeting our SLA, that's all we have to do, well, that's not very good, but under the contract, they're meeting it. So contracts aren't great for controlling, they're just there to cover you in case the relationship's completely broken down. Also, managing support issues is itself a support issue. If you've got nobody to even complain about how terrible the company you're buying stuff from is, you're pretty much out of luck. Google's a really great example of this. When their products work, they work really well. But when they stop working, you don't even know who to tell to say, my product isn't working anymore. Now, if you do happen to know someone to tell, they generally say, sorry, that's not my department, I can't do anything about it. But if you don't even have anybody to complain to, how are you going to get good support? And finally, the purchaser generally has a poor understanding of what they're going to require as far as support goes. Certainly, in my experience, that when people are focusing on buying stuff, they're going to focus a lot more on the problems they've got now than the problems they're going to have in 6 months or the problems they're going to have in a year. They're not going to put as much cost and thought into support. Again, it's trying to predict the future and trying to purchase based on predicting the future. So although criteria are useful when people are choosing products, criteria are excluders, not selectors. If something is too expensive, a customer won't buy it. If something just doesn't solve your problem, a customer won't buy it. If a product doesn't provide the support you need, a customer won't buy it. But after including all those excluders and saying this thing is way too expensive, maybe this thing's way too cheap and therefore I don't trust this thing doesn't have the features I need, you're still going to end up with a bunch of products because you've got a really wide band of things that are still acceptable. So all they're going to do is act as a band pass filter. They're just going to say, here are the ones we can choose from. They're not going to tell you which single item you can choose. Whew, I'm going quite a long time over time, and I already speak fast. We'll have to see how we do. So how do clients select products? First thing is they need to actually be aware of your product. If they don't know it exists, they can't even consider it as far as choosing whether they're going to buy from you or not goes. The next thing is they need to trust you. Because when you're saying, I provide this level of support, or when you're saying, my feature actually does solve your problem, they're going to have to rely on you and trust you to know whether that's true or not. And the more they rely on you, the more they trust you, the more that they think that when you say, this will solve your problem, the more that they think when you say, this is the best price you can get, the more that they think that when you say, we will support you, we'll be there for you, that you're telling the truth, that you really will be, that you really are the cheapest, then they're going to go buy from you. And those two things, awareness and trust, there's actually a word that means awareness and trust, and that word is reputation. People will buy the product that has the best reputation. They will look through, they will say, that one makes me feel best, that one reduces my fear the most, that one's the one that I think will do the best job, and they'll buy that one. So, that's all great, that's just me talking at you, but I'm going to give you 3 anecdotes. As we know, the plural of anecdote is anecdata, and after these 3 anecdotes, you will know conclusively that I am right. You should know that already because I'm always right. Everyone who works with me will tell you that, but nevertheless. So the first one is this saying. How many people have heard of this saying? No one ever got fired for buying IBM. Great, so there's a few old people in the audience. This is a real saying. This went round, and it wasn't just something people said sarcastically or ironically. This was a genuine belief. If you were buying something and you were buying anything and one of the sellers was IBM, IBM was always the safe bet. If you bought anything else that was risky, maybe they wouldn't do what they said they would, maybe they wouldn't solve your problem. Eventually you might be dragged up in front of management and told you did a bad job and fired. But if you bought IBM, that was always safe. And that wasn't necessarily because of IBM's actual behavior or outcomes in the market. That was because of their reputation. Of course, this didn't come out of nowhere. People didn't just start saying no one ever got fired for buying IBM. IBM really liked the saying. They worked really hard to make sure that everybody believed this. I've also heard the same saying said, no one ever got fired for buying Microsoft. Both these sayings possibly are no longer true. But certainly for a long time, IBM's reputation alone was enough to get them most sales. So here's another example, GitLab versus GitHub. These 2 pieces of software do very similar things. They both let you provide a web interface basically for managing Git repositories, version control system repositories for software. They have pretty close to the same feature parity now. GitLab has some stuff that GitHub doesn't do. GitHub has a few things that GitLab doesn't do. But for the most part, they meet the same requirements. They both have about the same cost, especially if you're doing open source software like Silverstripe does, which is free. So it's pretty hard to compare on cost. They both have the same level of support when you're giving them no money, which is none. But when we did Silverstripe Platform, we did CWP and Silverstripe Platform, and I'm going to talk about those in a second, we chose GitLab over GitHub. Because there was one feature that GitLab could give us that GitHub couldn't, which is that we needed to be able to host in New Zealand for government data sovereignty rules. We had to have it physically in a data center in New Zealand. And although GitHub did have a device at the time that could do it, it was quite a few versions back from their actual software. It was quite expensive. So we excluded GitHub because of that feature requirement. So in that case, we did initially want to go with GitHub, but we had to make an exclusion. But if that wasn't true, we would have gone with GitHub. And basically the only reason, and I'm the person who ultimately would have made that decision, it would have been my decision, we would have gone with GitHub, even if I had to stamp my feet about it a bit. The reason that we would have gone with GitHub is basically just because of their reputation. At the time, and potentially even still, I just like GitHub more as a company than GitLab. And I can't even tell you why particularly. There's nothing about the behavior of GitHub that I like particularly more than GitLab. They used to post a bunch of photos where they went out and got drunk, and that was cool because I used to go out and get drunk, so there was some sort of identity there. You know, they have problems, we have, you know, there's a lot of similarities, but the same thing with GitLab. They're awesome developers too. They work in Ruby. It's not PHP, but it's fine. I've done Ruby stuff before. We can't all be held accountable for our past mistakes forever. So there was no particular reason that I like GitHub more than GitLab, but we would have bought GitHub if that feature was true, just because I like them more. The last one, I really like this slide because there are no words on this slide. Looks like there are words, but there are only acronyms. UK CMS RFPs, United Kingdom Content Management System Request for Proposals. We have recently expanded, Silverstripe has recently expanded into the UK. We've opened an office in London. And although we are not doing web development ourselves in London, we are working with companies there to help them go for new bespoke web development and sell Silverstripe into those organizations that are looking to solve their web problems. And an interesting thing about the request for proposals that we get in the UK is they don't say, we would like a website, who can give us a website? They don't say, we would like a CMS, because we've got some content to manage, who can give us a CMS? They say, we are looking for a WordPress website. There's nothing specifically about WordPress that they need. If you read the rest of the RFP, there's nothing in there that would particularly align with WordPress. WordPress, okay, Silverstripe would be better, obviously, but WordPress certainly would solve all their problems. But there's no particular reason to need to put WordPress in there, except that in the UK, for some particular reason, for some subset of problems that we happen to be competing with, they've got the reputation that they solve that problem. And I guess either people have had bad experiences with other content management systems, or they just don't even know that those other content management systems exist. They put WordPress in those RFPs, mostly again because of WordPress's reputation. Awesome, so we have to have reputation. If you don't have reputation, you're not going to make enough sales. How do you get it? So the first way you can get reputation is just to be awesome. If you are really good, then you are naturally going to get good reputation as the customers that you work with talk about you. Sometimes this is not true. If you are selling to the NSA is probably not going around saying how awesome the software that you wrote that helps them listen to everyone's communication is. But in general, if you're doing a great job, if you're working for customers, they're going to be saying how great you are, they're going to be telling other people, and over time you're going to get bigger and bigger. This works, it's perfectly functional. Everybody who is doing a great job has some level of organic reputation growth. For some people, they're going to get a lot of reputation growth just organically because they've got some amazing new thing or something that happens to go viral, or something that triggers on some piece of the zeitgeist at the moment. For instance, if I was to invent a machine that could turn tacos into puppies, and even better if it was reversible and could turn puppies into tacos, the number of news articles about the sudden puppy glut, and then the sudden glut in people who are overweight from eating too many tacos, and then the sadness about how there weren't any puppies around anymore, Those would be great news articles that would get you some organic reputation. I don't know if it's necessarily the reputation you'd want, that you were the sole cause of everybody getting obese and there being no puppies in the world anymore, but it's certainly organic reputation growth. Another way that you can get reputation growth is just to pay for it. A lot of startups use this. I will assume that all of you are doing some sort of marketing, even if you don't realize it, because every time you're talking to anybody about your product, anytime you are doing any work for a customer, you're actually doing marketing too. But you can do really aggressive forms of marketing or advertising that help build reputation. One of the things that beverage manufacturers used to do, and possibly still do, is they will pay attractive people to go into bars and ask you to buy a specific brand of alcohol, or even offer to buy you a specific brand of alcohol, because that gets that name in your head and that builds reputation. Startups often do this. They talk about the cost per acquisition. So the amount of money that they are paying per person to convince them to buy their product, and all of that is reputation building. The next way you can get reputation is just by already having a lot of it. So we've already mentioned IBM and Microsoft. Reputation is very much like money, like capital, and that if you've got reputation, you can build more reputation just off what you've already got. If Silver Stripe were to come up with a new product and we were to release a news notice, a news article, it might get into a local paper, but it's certainly not going to go international. If Microsoft were to release a news product and they even put just like a 3-line thing into the newswire, that's going to be on every website that deals with technology. So they've already got enough reputation that anything they can do, anything they do will get more reputation for them. Fortunately, for whatever reason, companies with a lot of reputation seem to be really, really bad at all of these other things that I'm talking about. Maybe because they're already reputation rich, they can just rely on that. If they were really good at these other things too, if they acted like a startup as far as paying for reputation, if they were really good at organic growth and they were really good at the next thing I'm going to be talking about, then we would all be screwed. Fortunately, they seem to, for whatever reason, be terrible at these other things. And the last way I'm going to talk about to build reputation is to use a human microphone and build a community to talk about you behind your back. So we've already talked about how if you've got customers, those customers are going to be talking nice things about you because you're all amazing. But those are only your customers. You're going to do work so fast. If you can get people who don't even pay you to talk about how amazing you are, and even better, people who they've told how amazing you are to tell other people how amazing you are, so that you've got this repetition of voice over voice over voice, then that's the best way to build reputation that doesn't involve already having reputation or spending a lot of money. And I don't want to spend a lot of money because that involves giving money to someone else. I want to keep my money. I love money. Your community will take your reputation farther than you can yourself. But you can't just make a community. You can't just say, everybody talk about me, I'm amazing. I know, I've tried it, doesn't really work. A really good example of this, there was a recent thing by some detergent manufacturer where they set up a website and they were like, tell us your amazing stories about how you were able to get your shirts so clean with our products. Nothing on there felt anything like any sort of unique, real interaction. It all felt like either just fake grassroots or nothing. Like, who would ever go to a website and tell everybody else how amazing it was that you were able to get this stain out with this particular detergent product? If there are people in the room who did do that, I apologize for implying that you have no life. I'm aware that other people look at me and feel the same thing based on what I choose to do with my time. But, God, those are nerds. So you can't just make a community. You've got to give them something to talk about. And a great way to do that is to open source your code. When you open source your code, you're giving them a touch point and a piece of real shared ownership. A community is a group of people who are all talking about something they all feel like they own. And if you've actually given them the code and say, you own this, you can copy it, you can take it with you, then that's going to build a community around it. Not too bad. So now we've wended our way to open source. So we've already said you need the reputation to get the money, and you get the reputation by open sourcing, and I've convinced you by just it coming out of my mouth. But what do I mean by open sourcing? Open sourcing isn't a binary thing, which you either are or you aren't. There are lots of ways you can interact with open source. The least of which is, my little zoomy addition to reveal worked. That's good. I've been working on that this morning. Nothing like debugging JavaScript code instead of working on your slides when you should have actually finished your slides a week ago. So the least of which is no interaction. That means you don't use open source, you hate that open source exists maybe, but even if you don't mind that open source exists and you don't think it's some sort of communist conspiracy to turn all programmers into poverty-laden workers, you don't interact with it. There are certainly people who are like this. Even today, there are a reasonable number. There are companies that sell entire ecosystems, and as long as you don't need to go out of that ecosystem, you don't ever need to look at any sort of solution. They're saying, the only person who can solve your problems is us. We will solve all your problems for you. Here is everything you need to solve your problem. Don't look anywhere else. Don't look out there. Just give us the money. And those people are fine. There are also people who hate open source with a passion, who either think that the license will mean they have to give away all their code, or it just means that they haven't listened to this talk and I haven't yet convinced them that open sourcing their stuff will actually make them more money. They think that open source is just a way to get code for free. Hopefully no one in this room is still in that stage, but if you are, I would like to suggest that you at least move your way up to consumption. Consumption is where you don't actually do anything for anyone else for open source, but you take the open source and you use it. Almost everybody will be consuming some sort of open source. If you have an Android phone, or even if you have an iPhone, because that still has open source components in it, or even if you have something that isn't an Android phone or an iPhone, it probably still has open source components in it, although they probably aren't obeying the little thing in the license that says they have to tell you. If you've ever used a website, most of those websites are running on Apache, and that's open source. So everybody is probably consuming to a certain point, but if you make a deliberate decision to pick a product, and that product is open source, then that's what I'm thinking of as far as consumption here. So you've gone further than just saying open source doesn't exist and saying, hey, open source does exist, it can give me free stuff, and that's pretty awesome. So the next bit is engagement. That's where you've actually taken the step that we want you to take, the people who open source stuff, and started working in the community. So you've gone to a website, you've said, hey, I've got this bug, maybe you've raised a pull request, that would be awesome. But even if you haven't raised a pull request, then you've suggested a feature, or even just you've taken part in the community, you've told other people how this thing is awesome and open and free, and they can go and download it too. The next step is peripheral. So that's where you've gone beyond working with the community and started open sourcing some of your own stuff. It's not stuff that's core to your business, it's just stuff you happen to work on. So as a developer, for instance, if I wrote a tool that made my bash prompt a bit shinier, wasn't related to my core business at all, wasn't related to the things I sell to customers, but was useful to me, and I open sourced that, then that's peripheral engagement with open source. You're taking stuff that isn't related to your business, but is useful and giving that code away. The next step is open core. And this is a lot of companies who are involved in open source will go up to this step and they won't go any further. Open core is where they do give away quite a lot of the code that's important to their core business. This is their main thing, the thing they do, the thing they focus on. If you asked them what they did as far as products were, they would say, this is the thing I make, and they open source most of it. But there's a small portion of it that they hold back. They say this portion of it is either it's too enterprise, there's nobody who wants this but wouldn't pay for it, so we are going to make them pay for it. Or it's cost us a lot to develop, and we need to recoup that somehow, so we're going to charge for it until it's back. There's a lot of reasons that companies go for open core, but in the most cases, it's a business model decision. This is the way that they earn their money. Or at least some of their money. By taking this piece of software, this piece, and saying this is under a license. Now, some companies, even though they have open core, they will still give you the source code for those extra features, but they'll say, but you can't use them. GitLab is a good example of this. All of the enterprise features are already in GitLab. They're just all disabled, and theoretically, you can go and just enable them. The license says you're not allowed to, and I'm sure you've all read all of the licenses for all of the software you've downloaded and always obey them. But in this case, they seem the cost of enforcing compliance to them is higher than the cost of just doing it this way, and they seem to be happy with it. And then the last thing on the end of my spectrum here is complete, which is where you try and open source as much as you can. And this is where Silverstripe tries to sit. We don't always manage it. There's actually, although this is a spectrum, I've got nice little hard edges on my graph, it does extend off both ends. I mean, On the left-hand side of none, there's where you're actively trying to sabotage open source, and you're going onto websites and saying anybody who uses open source is deliberately opening themselves to security holes and is a moron, or raising pull requests where they just delete the whole repository and say this repository is way better if it was just empty, please go away, whatever. And off the other end of complete, there's where you're like aggressively transparent, like I think Ghost does this, where they actually expose even the internals of their business and have like their business meetings online and give all their financials away. But for me, the end of like the normal stage of the open source spectrum is complete, where you try and give away as much open source code as you can, and you don't consider whether that's going to particularly damage your business margins or the way you operate when you do that. When Silverstripe open sources, the two things we consider are, has someone else paid for this code who would object to us open sourcing it, because we do bespoke development. If someone's paid us, we do ask that they open source it if it's generally useful, but if it's specific to someone's business model or they've asked us not to and they've paid us, then we won't. The other thing is it just not going to be useful? And I'll talk about this in a second, but sometimes we've written code, you cannot use it without specific knowledge or specific infrastructure. Although we're happy to give you the code, we're really not that interested in writing docs for it. Really, we should write docs because internally we should have them, but we haven't, and the code's there, and we're not going to open source it because really we don't want to say, this device explodes from one end. Guess which one? And that's the open source spectrum. And what I want to get to, go on, clicky, is I want to convince you that you can go complete. You can go complete and you can make money. Silverstripe tries to do this. And like I say, we make money. We've got 70 employees now, almost. We're in 3 countries. They certainly pay me a fairly decent salary. They could always do more. Sam, who does my pay review, is not in the room. But if one of the Silverstripe employees or all of them could talk to how I could, 50%, that'd be awesome. I'm pretty sure we pay all of our other employees a really good salary. But anyway, we make enough money to do that. We don't make enough money that we can all drive around in Ferraris or have ridiculous parties with Rolling Stones every year or whatever the Silicon Valley types do. But we do all right. But what you're thinking is, Hamish, you are a moron. I've just given away all my code. People might love me, but if I don't have anything to sell them, they're not going to buy anything from me, are they? So, I'm going to talk about Silverstripe and how Silverstripe does make money. In addition to being the name of the company I work for, Silverstripe is also the name of an open source PHP web development framework and CMS that we open source. It's our most well-known open source offering, although we open source as much else as we can. Incidentally, if you recognize the reference in the title of the slide, you win a prize. That prize is the smug satisfaction of knowing that you recognize it and the people around you don't, and you are objectively better than them. So, the small beginnings of Silverstripe. Silverstripe started off as a bespoke web development company. We didn't have our own CMS. Our founder, I think, decided to write a CMS rather than use any of the existing ones. I assume, because he was quite young, that he was enhanced. But maybe not. Maybe it was just a really poor decision made rashly by youth. But anyway, he decided to write a CMS of his own rather than use one of the existing ones and base all of the bespoke web development work that Silverstripe did on that. And when it got to version 2, he decided to open source it. Now, you'd have to ask him why he decided to do that. But I think it's the reason that Silverstripe now has 70 employees and not still just 7. Because what happened next is that other people started using the Silverstripe CMS. We were still able to do bespoke development work with it. Silverstripe was not well enough known that people were going out and taking our gigs because they were using the Silverstripe CMS. But other people were using our software. People were talking about Silverstripe, and because the name of our company is the same as the name of our product, and yes, that is a little bit confusing, no one was really sure whether they were talking about the CMS or were talking about the company. And so we got people who would start to come to us. We got people who start to come to us and say, we've got a website and we've heard that Silverstripe's great for a website. We'd like you to do it because you're the guys who do Silverstripe. Sometimes we'd get people who come to us and say, we've heard about Silverstripe and we have no idea what it does, but it sounds awesome, sell it to us. Once we started getting that sort of call, that's when we knew that we'd made a right decision as far as open sourcing, because we were still getting bespoke work. People still wanted websites, they still wanted websites to be developed, and plenty of them didn't care what technology was being used, they just wanted the solution. But there were a lot of people who did want bespoke sites, but did care, and were coming to us because of the reputation of that open source software. And that got to the point where we were able to say we don't just do bespoke web development, we do digital transformations. We had enough clients that we could pick and choose who we felt we could go in and say, we're not just going to build your website, we're going to change the way you do your business. We're going to come in and we're going to help you, maybe work with Agile, we're going to look at the way that you interact with your customers and your community, and we can transform the way that you operate to make the web either a central component or certainly an important component of the way you do business. And that's amazing. And that's still probably 80% of our revenue. I'm sort of making up numbers based on graphs I half remember. But it's certainly a significant percentage of our revenue is digital transformation. And that's a really important part of the business because we get to go out to customers and see the actual problems they have and the problems that Silverstripe CMS is solving. I think it's one of the reasons that Silverstripe CMS is popular is because it is written by people who are still out there solving those problems for customers. But we've also started to sell, as I briefly mentioned before, Silverstripe Platform. Silverstripe Platform is a platform as a service which hosts your Silverstripe-based sites. So any development agency or anyone who has a site that's written on Silverstripe can host with us. We'll give you a specific versions of Silverstripe that we will say these are the best versions you should use. We'll set up the infrastructure. There are two different platforms. So for the government, there's, like I said, for data sovereignty reasons, there's a platform in New Zealand. And there's also a commercial platform that's on Amazon. We'll set up all that hardware for you. We'll provide support. We'll provide 24/7 people who, they're the ones that get called at 3 a.m. when the website goes down, not you. We've wrapped a whole layer of support and knowledge around the Silverstripe thing, but we see the Silverstripe platform as annuity revenue. Whereas the digital transformation is a service business where we go in and sell our hours, Silverstripe platform is a product business. We are selling you the product of hosting a site on our infrastructure. And in both those cases, whether we're selling a service or whether we're selling a product, almost all of those pieces we give away. So the core of Silverstripe platform that manages your deployments and your testing infrastructure is called DeployNaut. That's open source. It's on GitHub. You can go and get it. There's a little bit of code that we call Rainforest, which is the bit I told you about that explodes at both ends. I mean, at one end, certainly not back in the operator's face. That helps manage the interaction with AWS. But in general, anybody else could take the stuff we've given away and set up their own copy of Silverstripe platform. They certainly can go and do their own CMS. But what we do is we bridge the gap between those tools and the knowledge that you need to be able to actually use them. We're knowledge workers. I mean, all of us, that's the name. If you put us in a group, the thing that we do is knowledge workers. We use the things that we know, not the tools that we have. If you gave somebody free hammers and saws and wood and architect's plans and nails, most of them would say, I don't want that, I want a house. I sort of understand how all this crap gets turned into a house, but I don't want to have to do it myself. It looks hard, I'm probably going to do it badly, I don't want to live in a house that leaks, I don't want to live in a house that falls over. You need to bridge that gap for me. So what we sell is not the things, the tools that we open source, what we sell is the things that we know. Now that is a little bit risky because copyright protects the tools and copyright does not protect the things that we know, so we need to keep knowing more. Because if we ever stop knowing more, other people are going to catch up to us and eventually they're going to know as much as we do too. So it's certainly important to keep learning more and more things, but every time we're selling to somebody, we're not selling the tools, we are selling the knowledge. So, a little bit more recent of a reference. This one is not quite so high class. I do like the fifth element though. What stops competitors? Simply taking your source and building their own reputation. I'm going to flick through these fairly quickly because I'm already over time and you're probably all just thinking, shut up so I can go get some lunch. You're not as big as you think you are. When you are starting out, nobody really knows you. That means that you don't have any reputation. And without reputation, people won't even take your stuff for free. They will look at your source code and go, I don't know who wrote this. They probably wrote me around in 6 months. God, no. I would rather write my own than deal with this. So all you have to do when you're open sourcing your stuff to make sure that people still recognize that stuff as yours and not someone else's is to keep ahead of that reputation curve. As long as you're using your stuff and you're building your reputation, you've got that advantage that you've built up of the reputation you built while nobody knew who you were. And as long as you can keep doing better than other people can, you'll keep ahead of them. You'll keep being known for that product. And if you can't do that as well as your competitors can, why are you doing it? Is it because you love it? Find something you can do, be the best at. So, when should you not open source stuff? Because there are no absolutes except this one. I like that slide too. When you're not very good. Amplifiers are content agnostic and will amplify bad reputation too. If you open source stuff and people go, oh God, I used this and it was terrible, that is not the sort of reputation they want telling to everyone else. So, if you are worried about the quality of your code, if you're worried about the quality of your tools, you shouldn't be open sourcing it. Hopefully that applies to no one here. When you're not in control, you want a community, not a mob. When you are open sourcing stuff, the purpose of open sourcing it is to build a community so that community will build your reputation. You need someone in that community talking to the community, otherwise they will wander off into their own wild land and start talking about whatever the hell they feel like talking about, and it won't be you or your product. It will be something offensive and mad, and it's not the sort of thing that you want associated with your name. And when you are doing things differently. So, for instance, if people are impulse purchasing, nobody cares about the reputation of Cadbury when they are buying a Snickers, they just want that sweet, gooey goodness in their mouth. If you are selling umbrellas in the middle of a beach when it's raining, nobody cares if the umbrella is any good, they just care that they're getting wet and they want an umbrella. So there are situations where reputation doesn't help sell, and in those situations, you possibly should still open source, but it's not going to help you sell. But be careful, there is the quick and the dead. If you are not taking advantage of a benefit that helps you build reputation, and a competitor does, they are going to be building reputation faster than you. They are the one that's going to become known as the best solution for your problem. They are the one that's going to start picking up sales. So if you don't open source because you're afraid you fit in one of those buckets, then, and someone else does, like Silverstripe, then we're going to pick up the work and you don't. So be really careful before you decide not to open source because you're afraid that it's not going to help your reputation. So, to wrap up. Sorry, can you repeat that? You live and die by your reputation, not by your code. Open sourcing builds reputation and therefore helps you with sales. And if you don't, Silverstripe will crush you and stand alone on a tower of money. Thank you. I've been Hamish Friedlander.